All right, so chapter 9, Talia. From this point on, this is Talia's story. It's so like the whole introduction for the story was introducing the Realm Keepers, and now we're getting into the other characters. Yeah, let's jump into Talia's story. So they return to Shrouded Glade, um, and Talia was at the top of the academy staircase. She motioned them over, and I pointed out Talia to them and asked, "You guys ready to meet?" And he pointed out Talia to them and asked, "You guys ready to meet her?" They all nodded in agreement, and he smiled. So from this point on, and this is all like I don't have lore for Talia, right? I made her name up. I literally this is all based off of a TCG card, so I'm literally just basically using my imagination here. So this is all kind of like original lore for the most part. I mean, everything I've written is kind of like from my point of view, from my imagination, like what I think should have happened with their story. So yeah, let's get into it. So Talia asks, "Welcome home, Bryce. I see you found 3 protectors. What might be their names so I know who's guarding what I found?" They introduced themselves one by one. Jess said, "My name is Jessica Potts, cousin to Sam Potts." Talia said, "Cousin to the protector of Sanctuary. I expect great things from you then." She looked nervous but nodded. Next, Nate said, "Hello, my name is Nathan. I built this." He showed her Sparky, world's first ever hoverboard, and one made of Rob Goblin junk. She said, "Built that all by yourself. Bryce, you exceeded my expectations. I half expected you to bring back 3 Chugawugs." Bryce laughed. The thought did occur to him when they were at Tinglewood Fort, but then he thought, how could he explain everything to those big guys after his whole journey? Too much work for his taste. She continued, "This is groundbreaking, Nathan. Continue to do work like this, and you'll be the future of the Grove." And finally, Cade, their no emotions friend, he gave Talia's hand a shake and said, "My name is Cade." She looked confused and said, "Now what makes you protector?" "Because all I see is that hammer that Bryce gave you." He chuckled, then turned into his other form, growled, and turned back. Talia took a step back and said, "Well, alright, enough said, I suppose." And then Bryce says, "Well, we're here. I think it's time for that story you told me about before I left to find these wonderful protectors." She nodded and said, "You'll want to sit down. The story is a bit of a long one." They all gathered and listened to Talia. She said, "It was 3 years ago. I was a young student at a place called SRS. The longer name is Sanctuary Reserve Squad." So, before I talk about that, the story, if you're curious about what time period this takes place in, so obviously the prologue says 13 years ago, like 2009 is when, the unbinding happened, right? So currently it's 3 years later. So the story takes place in 2012. Okay? So just keep that in mind if you're trying to keep up with like where the story takes place. And as for the SRS, so the SRS Geomancer thing, I figured like, okay, so how am I gonna work in this part of the story, right? So on the actual TCG card for Talia, even though she doesn't have an actual name, um, I figured like, okay, well, I might as well make the SRS thing like canon, So I decided to come up with a name, and I did. Sanctuary Reserve Squad, which is the squad that Queen Iani asked the 4 original, Realm Keepers to create. So yeah, I thought it was a good little segue from the prologue to include this point. So yeah, we were Sanctuary's last defense if everything went sideways, but I was still learning at the age of 18. They still wouldn't let me go on missions, but I was still watching them train. Also, from this point on, Talia is now narrating, so from this point, now she's just going to be narrating the entire time. This art I actually found in TCG. I was like, I feel like the SRS like warriors would wear like red or something like that, and this was a pretty good like art piece to use for the visual novel. So yeah, then Talia goes on to say they were of the most elite warriors you can find, so many of them ready to defend Sanctuary when it would be needed most. I had hoped that I would be next to be trained to be a warrior, but it seemed hope was slowly dwindling. While I was studying the properties of the warp stones, I overheard the professors and trainers talking and decided I can't type apparently, and I can't proofread. Decided to get a better listen. We had 2 professors and 2 trainers. The professors' names were Azur and Ethser. Azur was a cautious old wizard who knew the risks of Sacred Grove and strived to keep us safe. Ethser, on the other hand, was smarter than all of us put together, even corrected us when we thought we knew something about Sacred Grove, but I'm glad she did. They taught us the good, the bad, and the ugly about Sacred Grove, different species and races we may encounter out in the wild, and most importantly, Gleam and Gloam. Those two elements were my major at SRS. So Talia basically majored in learning about these two elements, which is why she knows so much. So yeah, and she said, the more I learned, the more I wanted to discover. The trainers' names were Kirill and Arkanos, or Arkanos. Kirill was like you, Bryce, except he trained pets. He made sure that everyone had a pet to keep them company when they weren't training. Not everyone liked him, mainly because he was reserved and cared for the animals the most, but Talia respected him. Arkanos was a wizard like Azur, actually his apprentice, but Arkanos trained everyone there, not just wizards, but warriors, archers, brawlers, you name it. He enjoyed what he did, and Talia could see it whenever Talia was studying. So yeah, I decided to, a lot of the characters in the story, I decided to look at like TCG arts of like heroes, and I was like, okay, I want to include some heroes into the actual lore, and see if there's like cards I could use that would actually work. So Azur, Ethzer, Kirill, and Arkanos, these four are the original Realm Keepers. So if you were like curious about like who wore what, so Azur, I was trying to like figure out who wore what, like who was in what costume. Kirill wore the blue vestment, the order vestment with the sword. Arkanos wore, I'm pretty sure, I don't know who, because they're both wizards, so it's kind of hard to see, but I think Arkanos wore the yellow vestment, and then Azur wore the red vestment, and then obviously Ethzer wore the green vestment. So I kind of mirrored these four to be like the other Realm Keepers because they're the first, so they were there during the Unbinding. But yeah, so these four came from all walks of life, knew everything in Sacred Grove before better than we knew ourselves. I decided to see what they were talking about, and so this is where those characters start talking, and Esther asks, "You can't be serious, Kirill." And then Kirill says, "Dead on, miss. She needs to be ready for what's coming." Arkanos said, "But we can. Even if we train her, she's not going to be ready for what's to come." And then Azur yelled, "Enough!" They froze. I bet everyone in the SRS heard him yell like that. Azur spoke, "Talia is more than capable to train with everyone else, but I won't allow it. For what she's looking into, if we trained her, who knows what she'd do with that training." Kirill said, "Well, I've seen the look in her eyes when she watches me train the animals. She deserves a chance of training with the other students." Arkanos said, and what if she destroys Sacred Grove with whatever she discovers because of that training? I train students to learn how to protect Sacred Grove, not just Sanctuary. I've seen the look in her eyes too, but in those eyes all I see is chaos." And then Azur asked Ethzer, "What do you see in her eyes?" Ethzer said, "A flame that has yet to ignite. You try training her, and who knows what becomes of Sacred Grove. I don't believe it's worth risking the fate of our homes." Azur agreed and said, "I see light and darkness in that girl's eyes, and as much as I believe she is at the age to train with the others, it's not the right decision. Until we can fully evaluate her mental state, she will not train." They all agreed and left the room except Kirill. He said to himself, "Everyone deserves a fair shot, regardless of who they are or what they could become." So, basically, their whole job, right, is to train these other people to defend Sacred Grove. So they don't want to risk another Unbinding, is basically the whole conversation they're having. They think Talia was a risk to train. Like, if she got trained, she might cause another Unbinding. So they were thinking like they were being smart and, not training her while training all the others. I felt like that was important to write because, like, okay, Talia, she knows so much about this Gloamstone, but like what's her backstory? Like, why is she in Shrouded now? And I don't know if I wrote it in here. I probably didn't. No, I did. So this academy, obviously, it's at Sanctuary because that's where Queen Yanni wanted them to start this academy. So yeah. And then going from that, Talia cried and ran out of the room. She left the SRS to be alone. She ended up going into the forest where no one could hear her. She sat for a few minutes before she was ready to go back, but then she heard something. She decided to wander the forest and see what the noise was. What that noise was, she approached a weird-looking cave, a line in really dark purple stone. The entrance had a light and a dark door to it. It was opened. She entered and discovered a room filled with books and old manuscripts. It looked like the perfect place to study, but at the center of the room were two artifacts that she'd never seen before. One looked like it was that of a warp stone, representing Gleam. The other looked like it represented its polar opposite, Gloam. So, funny enough, like, so this isn't TCG art. This one right here, this is actually in-game. I think it's like a weapon or something. I'm not actually sure what it is, but I found that image and I was like, you know, it almost looks like this, so I figured why not use it. And yeah, it kind of worked out. This is actually TCG art though. So yeah, and then she was about to touch one of them, but someone in the cave yelled, "What do you think you're doing, child?" And she looked up above the stairwell, and there was a short man in purple clothing. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I saw these artifacts I've never seen in my studies before, and I wanted to touch one." He looked confused and asked, "You see two glowing artifacts, and your first instinct is to touch one?" She laughed and said, "My curiosity gets the better of me, sir. I'm sorry I intruded your cave." He laughed and said, "Oh, it's no intrusion at all, miss." And she said, "Talia, sir." He smirked and said, "So serious, Talia. My name is Baron. Pleased to make your acquaintance." So this kind of sort of introduces Baron into the story a little bit. Baron actually has a part in Talia's story. I thought that would be cool to include. Like, okay, so how does, you know, Dark Cheat's kind of the main villain of the Realm Keepers. So how does he get introduced? And it's through Talia. So yeah, and I used the in-game Free Realms image because there's actually a ton of concept art for Baron, like TCG art. There's like one thing of concept art. It's crazy how much there is. So I decided to use that. She laughed and asked, "What is this place, and why are you alone in it?" He said, "Well, this place is called the Observatory. It's where I do light reading, but also to observe those two artifacts. I haven't been able to figure them out, but in time I will. To answer your other question, I was once a student at Shadowglade Academy. Till I wasn't. I was banished for extreme uses of magic, but it wasn't that extreme. I set a little tree on fire, no harm in that." She looked puzzled and said, "Sounds like you needed a break from all that stress at the academy. Fire seemed to be the best way to relieve it." He said, "Well, it helped a little, but I wanted to further my research, so I came here, near Sanctuary." She asked, "Why here of all places?" And he said, "This place is where I'll find all of my answers. Anything I have questions about can be answered with these books. I practically know all there is to know, except about these artifacts, as you called them." She looked at them, wondered if she could help. Her major at SRS was into Gleam and Gloam, so she asked, "Mind if I take a crack at it, sir?" He nodded and said, "By all means, have a go at it." She studied them for a few minutes before trying anything drastic and then asked, "Have you tried touching them before?" He froze, then said, "Well, no, but I didn't want to combust or anything like that. Who knows what these two beauties could do?" She said, "I know a lot about the elements these two represent. Perhaps if we each touched one artifact, we could balance out the power they put out." He thought about this for a moment and said, "Well, the idea has merit. Let's give it a try." So they each touched an artifact. She chose the Gleam artifact, and he chose the Gloam artifact. Suddenly, the artifacts imbued them with its energy. Her eyes turned bright yellow, and his turned dark purple. We were frozen by the artifacts and couldn't move for at least a few minutes. The artifacts then stopped floating and fell to the ground. They awoke from their frozen state, and both of their eyes returned to normal. She asked, "What just happened?" He said, "My dear, I believe you just unlocked what I thought wasn't possible. I had theories, but this is extraordinary." He looked at her, then his eyes went dark purple again. Then he said, "You are the key to all I need to know. You will stay here until I return, or else." She sensed something evil within him at the time. She had no idea what he would do, but she knew she had to warn everyone about his power, so she said, "You can't keep me here." She tried to leave, but he put out his hand and grabbed me by using dark magic. Then he threw her against some books lying about. He said, "Well, I don't think you understand the situation. We both tapped into elements only we know about. You'll stay here until I can gather more out of artifacts like those two. Plan on reading a few books or two until I return." He looked at her again with a fire that's been ignited. Then he locked the doors and left. So this story will kind of intertwine with the next chapter, but basically what they did was they started so if you go back to the prologue, I won't scroll all the way back up, but the prologue basically talks about how a dwarf found out about the elements Gleam and Gloam and put them into two artifacts, and one dwarf and another dwarf touched them, and then the energies went into them. So it's a similar thing here, right? The same thing sort of happens, except something different does happen. The Gloam went into Darkcheat, and there was no power from the Gleam from the one that went into Talia. If that makes any sense, it makes sense to me. So basically, like, you know how the Gleam Stone was used in that prologue, now it's Darkcheat has this power of the Gloam. If that makes any sense, it's kind of, it'll be more explained in the next chapter, but I just want to kind of explain that. So yeah, and then she took his advice and read some books. Although she was frustrated that she was trapped in here, she needed some distraction from what just happened. She wondered why she couldn't tap into the power from the Gleam artifact she touched. Maybe she was supposed to act as some sort of catalyst for the artifacts, and she transferred power to him, but none to herself. She stared up at the ceiling and discovered a hole in the cave, so she stacked every book that she could find to the top of the cave ceiling. She managed to escape the room. She ran to the SRS to tell them of what she had discovered, but by the time she got there, the entire place was burnt to ash. She went into the SRS to see if anyone had survived, but there was no one, until she saw Kirill sitting in a corner covered in ash. She went over to him to see if he was okay. He said in a low voice, "What did you do, Talia?" She was shaken and said, "There was those stones, and me and this man touched them. He got dark powers and locked me in a cave." He chuckled and coughed and said, "Sounds about right. Whatever happened killed everyone here. Esther, Arknos, and even old Azure. My poor pets didn't even get a shot at exploring Sacred Grove." And she said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know what would happen. I just wanted to be trained, and I stormed off, discovered a cave, and thought how cool it would be if I could bring you guys something back that would change our fates." He looked at her and said, "Ain't nothing changing what's coming, Talia. We were just preparing for what Queen Valerian saw in her dream. But it looks like we're too late." She asked, "Dream?" He said, "In the Queen's dream, she foresaw Shrouded Glade being covered in darkness. No reason for how it was happening, but she urged us to train the people of Sanctuary to be prepared for what was coming." So, I know Queen Ayani started this academy to prevent another unbinding, but there is an instance in the storyline where Queen Valerian, like, you know, she has this dream about Sacred Grove being covered in darkness. And so I thought it would be cool to include the academy into that, and she was like, "We got to prepare for this, you know? You guys got to prepare for what's happening." Yeah, I thought that would be kind of cool to include in the story. So yeah, and then she asked, "Oh, no, the apostrophe." There we go. She asked, why did no one want to train me?" He sighed and said, "I guess you overheard our conversation. You could have been a risk for that darkness. We couldn't take it. Every person that was trained had to be observed first. Those people were pure of light, no darkness whatsoever. But you, we couldn't tell, so we decided against it. And I agree, you weren't ready for it, and look what happened because of what you went off and did." As she started crying and said, "You could have given me a chance, then none of this would have happened." He scoffed and said, "If we had, the outcome would have been the same, risk or not. Nothing would have changed our fates." She noticed he was holding his stomach. There was a puncture wound where his hand was. She asked, "What should I do now? Where should I go?" He said, "Go to Shrouded Glade. You made this mess. Now you have to clean it up. If there's anything you should do, it's gather new protectors to battle whatever's coming. Seems like you're our last hope." His eyes closed and he wasn't moving. There were tears down her face and no one to wipe them away. So yeah, she was basically tasked to go to Shrouded Glade to prevent whatever darkness was coming. And yeah, that's kind of like the whole, like, her whole backstory is she was tasked to do this thing and she's done it. So yeah, she says, and that's my story. Bryce and the other protectors were shocked to hear Talia's story. They all looked up at each other, then asked, "So, the shards, why did you go up to that mountain if you were planning on going to Shrouded Glade?" She smiled and said, "I did go to Shrouded Glade, but I went up to that mountain while I was there because I felt those dark energies I felt years ago in that cave. So I separated it in the hopes that Baron could never get his hands on such power ever again." Bryce nodded and asked, "So that thing you said about being a geomancer, discoverer of supernatural powers and objects, was that a lie?" She stopped for a second and said, "Yes and no. Most people at the SRS called me a geomancer because of all my time spent looking at books or studying various things in my surroundings. But I did lie about the second part. I've only discovered what I've mentioned because I needed to use that as a cover. The High Council believes it, and I want to keep it that way." So yeah, the whole discoverer of supernatural powers of objects, she kind of lied about that part. There is like this whole story is like her telling, like, you know, she told some lies and now she's trying to, like, you know, make up for it. She felt unsure about Talia now, but she connected me with all these people. Maybe she's not so bad, but this Baron guy is. Bryce nodded and said, "All right, fair enough. I don't think I would have gotten this far without my team, so I think I should be thanking you for all you've done. Pushing me to get out there and find others to connect with. It helped me a lot, not just to find other protectors, but to have people in my life." So again, that whole connection storyline I've been trying to include is kind of, you know, it's portrayed here as well. So yeah, Talia smiled and said, "Glad I could help, even if I had other motives behind why I asked you to go to all this trouble." And Bryce shook his head and asked, "It was no trouble at all. Now then, what's next for us, Talia?" She thought for a moment and had an idea. She said, "We need an official name for Sacred Grove's protectors." She called over... Alright, explain. There we go. Sacred Grove's protector. She called over the High Council and all the other pixies for the big announcement, even though Bryce had no idea what she was going to call them. She asked to stand front and center, so they did. And then she exclaimed, "Druids of Shrouded Glade, I would like to present the Realm Keepers." So again, it's not really clear in the prologue whether or not the original 4 had that name, Realm Keepers, but she thought it was a good name, so. And then she said, "May they keep us safe." They all cheered, and Bryce was in shock, as was Jess, Nathan, Cade. It was like we were going to save the world one day, and we didn't even know it. Pixies returned their train. The High Council approached them, and Lazzy said, "What you're doing for us, Bryce, I can't thank you enough. Hopefully we won't need protecting, but I'm glad you'll be here for us." He shook Bryce's hand, as well as the others, and Talia said to us, "You 4 ready for your next mission? It's important, but could be boring." Bryce said, "Whatever you need from us, Talia, we'll do it." She smiled and asked, "Good. Your next task will be defending the shards you hid. Bryce, you will stay here and watch over the Order Shard. Jess will go back to Lakeshore, watch over the Nature Shard. Nathan will return to Maryvale and watch over the Machine Shard. And finally, Cade will return to Blackspore to watch over the Chaos Shard. Any questions?" Jess asked, "Why did you name the shards after the sphere names in that card game?" So this is kind of going to explain the whole why is TCG why is that so important, that whole TCG connection to the shards. And then she goes to say, "I suspect that card duelists have a lust for power. I observed the games that the Pixies played here and discovered that every time a Pixie won a game, they wanted to play more and more. So if we match the shards as a card sphere, we'll know who would want to go after such power." Jess asked, "Using the shards as bait?" She nodded and said, "I need to clean up my mess, as Kirill said, so the best way to find Baron and put an end to this once for all is to use the shards as bait for anyone who wants power. I'll ask the card artists to make those shards into trading cards, and in the hopes it attracts the Baron." So yeah, basically she's trying to put a stop to Baron, and she's using TCG as a way of bait. I thought that was like a cool way to include TCG a little bit, is, you know, use the cards as bait. And then Bryce just thought of something. He pulled his card deck out to show Talia 4 heroes he had seen in his deck. Seemed like Talia might know them. She started teaming up and said, "It's been a while." So I actually did include, this is kind of cool. because Talia knew these people, right? So I thought it would be cool to include that Bryce has a card deck and he has these cards in his deck. Or he had the cards on him. So yeah. It's kind of neat. I don't know. I really like that that I include this part because Talia got to see her teachers on TCG art. So yeah. Continuing, she continued, I'm glad someone remembered who they were and gave them a new purpose. So yeah, they live on in TCG basically. Which I thought was a really cool way to include them in the story again. And then Talia put the cards in her satchel and asked, so is there anything you four would like to do before you depart on your missions? Bryce asked, would it be alright if we spent our last night together at Chugawug? She nodded and said, sure, but one last thing before you all go. She pointed to each of the sanctuary tree symbols on the clothing and said, on the vestments, and said, I got these suits from the SRS before I left. They were for an elite group that went out in the Sacred Grove and protected the world from those who would wish to harm the original keepers. But since they are now yours, you should know that pressing a symbol on the suit will let the other people wearing a suit that there is danger or you need help. It helps that I learned all this from my studies at SRS. Bryce asked, what about the weapons that we wield? She smiled and said, they are paired with the suits but also connect to the wielder. So if you use the weapon, you've truly connected with it and unlocked its special power. So yeah, the suits and the weapon are connected in a way. So there is magic to them. But yeah, so the little sanctuary symbols on the suits, because all of the Realm Keepers have one, they work as sort of a ping almost. Like if you press it, like everyone will come run into that person. So yeah. And Talia said, now go enjoy your last night together. I feel you'll need it before you protect those shards. And they all agreed and set up for Wugchug. We arrived and greeted the friendly Wugchugs. They were way nicer than the ones in Briarwood. Even invited us over to the stage to drink Wugchug root beer. We accepted the offer. A man by the name of Bruce was singing for everyone on the stage as well, even has his own guitar. So yes, I'm actually going to pull this over real quickly. So yeah, Bruce. So I included him into my lore story. I had a little bit of inspiration from someone in the Discord, and I thought it would be cool to include him into this. So yeah, his locations are like Wugachug, Snow Hill, and Queensfield. I thought it might be cool for him to like play a show or something for the Realm Keepers. And yeah, and I also use this lore. So he's a semi-retired human NPC rockstar, well known for his past performances in Snow Hill and Wugachug. Bruce is currently located in Queensfield Sanctuary as a merchant. So yeah, there was a bunch of lore there was so much lore behind Bruce. It is honestly insane. Look at this. Look at this lore. There's literally way too much, and he has his own TCG art too. That's also what's crazy. So yeah, he's got his own TCG card and anything. But yeah, I include him in the lore, and I did change this a little bit to have him actually be in the Sanctuary Town, not just Queensfields. But yeah, so let's continue on this. Bruce was singing for everyone on stage, even had his own guitar and band behind him. It was such a good show. Nathan Cade were a little tipsy on the root beer they drank and were slow dancing with Bruce. Don't know what got put in their drinks, but at least they were having fun. Jess and Bryce were sitting at the table and started talking. She asked, kind of weird this is our last night together, huh? Bryce said, yeah. Bryce said, well, not technically. If there's any danger, we'll have to reunite. She laughed and said, be serious. If this is our last night together, it's got to be special. Bryce looked at her and pointed out her pals across the field and asked, as special as they are right now? She giggled and said, that's a highlight of this night, if anything, but I want you to know that you have changed my life for the better. I'm glad you decided to trust me with all this. Bryce smiled and asked, who better to protect the nature shard than Jess Potts, cousin of Sam Potts? She smiled and said, Can I give you a hug? It doesn't feel right not hugging you on the last night we see each other. Bryce smiled and said, anytime, Jess, anytime. They hugged for a good moment. She felt warm. He wondered if they just formed some sort of connection different than we have with our mounts. So again, that whole connection thing kind of intertwining. It's cool. It's neat. I thought that was a really special moment between them. So yeah, Nathan Cade came over to introduce Bruce. Then Cade said, "Guys, you gotta meet this legend. He knows how to play a guitar blindfolded. Without a guitar, can you believe it?" And I don't know if I'll change it to asked. And that he got real loud for a moment, and Bryce decided to shake Bruce's hand, then asked, "Pleasure to meet the legend from the Wugga Chug stage. Say, what brings you all the way out here?" He said, "I'm only here for one night, then I gotta go back to Sanctuary. I'm a semi-retired musician, but I usually play shows at Snow Hill or here. My other job is being a merchant in Sanctuary, so if you feel the need to get your air guitar on, feel free to stop by there." Bryce nodded and said, "Hey Bruce, it was good meeting you, but do you mind if I have a serious team meeting with my friends here?" He nodded and said, "Sure, gotta get ready to go back anyway. Later, Freemers." Bryce had no idea what Freemers meant, but he assumed it was a phrase for rock stars. So yeah, I included that whole Freemers thing. I love that term so much. So I included that into the lore, like Bruce says it. My words are losing me. But yeah. So then Bryce goes to say, "All right, team, huddle up." Like I was some leader, but I guess I was according to Zelda. He continued, "We need to be ready for whatever comes our way after tonight. So while defending the shard, practice using your weapons. Anything you learn will come in handy for any coming danger." Cade asked, "Well, I've tried using mine, but nothing happens." Bryce looked at him and was worried, but said, "Listen, all of our weapons started working when we got into trouble. Maybe you haven't found the right situation to use it in. Just be prepared for when that day comes." So yeah, so the only weapon that hasn't been activated is Cade's hammer. There's a reason for that. It'll be, explained in a later chapter. But yeah, kind of neat that they're just gonna be practicing using their weapons. But yeah, Bryce continues, "I know we've only known each other for a short while, but I'm happy that we made such strong connections that hopefully will never break." Jess smiled at him, knowing their connection was the strongest. Bryce smiled back. Nate said, "Well, if it does break, I will radio in using the button on our suit to let you know, and I'll repair the connection myself." They all started laughing, and Nate looked as confused but joined as well. Bryce said, "All right, let's head to our shards. Make sure it stays where it is at all times. If there's a sign of trouble, signal and let us know." They said their goodbyes and went to their assigned positions. Things finally calmed down and were peaceful. Bryce went to guard the Order Shard. He had to sit by the mine shaft most of the time, but when he got a chance, he snuck away to play a game or two of cards with the Pixies, even did some mount training down by the mine shaft if someone needed to be trained. Jess used her bow against the targets near the lake where she threw the shard into. The neighbors weren't too pleased with the noise her bow made, though, the sonic loud noise. Nath kept tinkering on his hoverboards and kept checking on the shard he dropped below the Rainbow Glow above Maryvale. He planned on changing the future Sacred Grove. And Cade struggled. He tried to use his hammer, but could never get it to work. Madame Zelda saw his frustration and kept a close eye on the shard. She had hoped he would figure the hammer out soon. So they protected the shards, and everything seemed normal in Shrouded Glade until it wasn't. So yeah, that's Talia's whole chapter, and it kind of segues into the Realm Keeper's last night together. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into Chapter 10, Dark Cheat. So, Baron von Darkcheat, or Chapter 10, Dark Cheat. Let's get into his character. So there's a few things to go over. He's got a bit of lore, He's got some things. So yeah, there is some lore, obviously, since the whole focus isn't based around TCG for this story. There's a lot I had to take out, because his whole thing is I just need to restore the power of the first deck, and I'm just like, oh, okay. And then no one will stop me from becoming the king of Sacred Grove. So I don't think, in my story at least, that's not his purpose, right? I don't think he's looking to become the king of Sacred Grove. So that two-story things have already changed there, right? TCG's not his main thing. He's not trying to become king of Sacred Grove. Yeah, and it says he's an NPC card duelist. Again, I changed that. He's not that. Okay, primarily in Snow Hill. Again, not. I change a lot with Dark Cheat's story. Which is it needed to be done. Trust me. Throughout he is prominently on the Realm Keepers. Kind of true. Madame Zelda and the player. So there again, there's a lot of story that I did keep, which this I kept. Player must choose a Realm Keeper card deck in the game to combat him as he's threatening all of Sacred Grove. So obviously that's not how this story is gonna work, because the player, we don't have the player in this story, you know. He is also said to have created the Glumstone, presumably ancient weapon that would further aid in his evil plans. True. I kept that lore in there, and we're gonna explore that. I don't think there's anything else. Oh, there is this part. With their decks, players must win enough games against Baron and his 3 henchmen. So I saw that and I was like, that's a chance to introduce characters, because if there's 3 henchmen, why not include that? So I did include that in this. And yeah, that's I think that's pretty much it. So there's not too much more lore behind Dark Cheat, or like where he comes from. He is a dwarf, so I know that it seems odd, like that. Like obviously there's a bunch of dwarves in the Sacred Grove, but he's like the first, like, I guess, in-game character dwarf that's like mentioned throughout Freelm. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So I actually had Dark Cheat start out in Shrouded Glade, same as Bryce, except this is like a few years like before Bryce, kind of like same time as Talia. So from this point on in this chapter, Dark Cheat is the one narrating. So I just want to you know, have you guys keep that in mind, in case you're wondering who's narrating this. So yeah, let's get into it. It all started in Shrouded Glade. I was a young scholar learning how the elements of Sacred Grove worked and made potions while I did it. Pixies at this academy knew everything there was to know about the elements, how safe they were, and of course, how dangerous they could be. Well, I strive to be the most knowledgeable dwarf at Shrouded Glade, so I could master the elements, have a place in Sacred Grove, but until then, I'll be stuck here doing some light reading. One of my fellow scholars approached me. He was a ninja at heart, but also wanted to learn how to be invisible. Bold approach for the man, but I worried for his safety sometimes. His name was Repeat Pants. Funny. So I had a lot of fun writing Dark Cheat's chapter, and besides the last chapter, or I guess the second to last chapter in the last chapter, this is the longest chapter in the story. Because obviously, you know, you need to include a lot about the main villain. Like all the heroes got introduced. They had 2 chapters each. I feel like Dark Cheat had to have his own backstory and you know, need to be fairly long. So yeah, and then Repeat Pants, I made this kit. Well, I didn't make him up. He's actually a TCG card. I believe he's a hero as well. I think. Yeah, he's a hero. So I decided to have, you know, Dark Cheat have like kind of a friend at Shrouded Glade, like a character that, you know, could be introduced alongside him. So yeah, Reese said, "You know, if you spend all your time reading, B, you won't get anywhere in this place." He scoffed and asked, "How would you know, stealthy one? I bet you haven't managed to go invisible yet." He gasped and said, "How dare you? You have the nerve to accuse me of not mastering an ability? A ninja is always precise and always on the move. Shame on you, B." And he calls him B because it's like a nickname for Baron. He rolled his eyes and asked, "So, progress, any?" He said, "Yeah, nada, but I heard we were doing final evals today. Might be the best time to try anything new you're working on out in front of the headmasters." He thought for a moment and said, "Well, I am working on something, but I need a test subject to use it on. Would you happen to be available? Since you don't have stealth mode down, I presume you're free for the final eval." He froze and asked, "What sort of spell are you working on and it requires a test subject?" He He chuckled and said, "Oh, it's harmless stuff, really. Just gives you a good tickle and then you're done. Don't worry your little head with the details." He looked mad and said, this part, oh boy, he says, "I'll have you know that my head is shaped perfectly round, B." They both laughed, and then he asked, "So, you in?" He nodded, and they both shook on it. He got up from his chair and said, "I'm off to visit our local smith. Be back for final evals later." Ree waved him off and said, "Tell Nervy I said hi." He turned back and winked, then said, "Oh, will do, Tiger." Ree blushed underneath his mask, and he couldn't help but chuckle to himself. He's had a crush on Nervy for ages, but she'd never given to his stealthy charm. He approached her and said, "How goes the forging today?" She said, "Darn wind won't give way." He gasped and said, "I'll have to cast some spell later to make it stop." She smiled and asked, "So what brings you to my little neck of the woods?" And I also, so Nervy is a blacksmith. It's not, I don't think she has like a location to where she is. But I figured it would be cool for Shrouded Glade to have their own blacksmith. Another character to introduce. So yeah, he thought for a moment and said, "Well, Ree misses you and sends his love, but for what I came here for, I need a favor." Nervy laughed and asked, "Oh, Ree, he'll never give, but what do you need from me?" He said, "I need 10 of your hottest coals, stat." She asked, "Wow, tall order, can do, but what would you need coal for?" He said, "The spell I've created requires a few things, but the most important ingredient being coal. It is of utmost importance, as I will be using it in the final evals." She said, "Sounds important. I don't really know what you sorcerers do over at the academy, but I'm always happy to help." He smiled and she smiled back. She gave him the coals in a protective case, and then for some reason, put her hand on his and said, "Hey, you know you can come by any time other than for coal, right?" He froze for a second and said, "Oh, sure, I suppose I can." He waved her goodbye and went on his way, but little did Reed know that Nervy had the crush on him. Oh, that'll crush him. Oh, it'll be absolutely crushing, but I'll keep this to myself for now. He returned to his room to make the spell he was going to cast. He added the 3 less important ingredients: 1 egg from the local hen, an ore from the mine shaft, and a lock of hair from Ree. May seem extreme, but it's the only way the spell will work. It's amazing he even got hair from Ree, but he digresses. So he's making this like spell that he's hoping he's basically, I wouldn't call him like a wizard. I'd call him like a sorcerer in a because it's not really clear if he's a wizard at all. I didn't even write that in. I just made it seem like he was just studying to learn spells, not to be a wizard. So yeah, I'd consider Dark Cheat like a sorcerer for sure. And he says, finally, he started hammering down the hot coals in the spell, breaking every piece where he needed it, and before the final eval, his tablet of ignition was complete. So he made like a tablet, instead of like an actual, like, because most of the spells in Sacred Grove for like what wizards use are on paper. He made a tablet, which makes him like a sorcerer, I guess. So yeah. And then he says, everyone at the academy uses silly scrap paper to put their spells on, but his needed a bit of flair to it. So he made his way over to the final eval where everyone at the academy was today. Ree waved at me and pointed out 3 headmasters had just arrived. So, I included a lot of characters here. I don't think these 2 are heroes. I'm not sure off the top of my head. I know Jamie Swift's song, she's a hero. I made it so this is going to be important. It'll be explained like way later in another chapter, but there were headmasters before there was the High Council. And yeah, I don't know. I really wanted to include different characters for a Dark Cheat storyline because I thought it would be cool to include new characters. And this whole story is just including like a bunch of different characters, and that's what I want to do in like the future if I write more lore. I want to include new characters into the story that haven't been introduced. So, yeah, let's get into it. So, he took a look and saw them all in their pixie glory. It was truly wondrous. The first headmaster was named Joseph. the teacher of void magic. No one could understand that sorcery, so this is Joseph right here. I put the images in order so you'd know who's who. No one could understand that sorcery, so he ended up being both a headmaster and a hall monitor since his class got canned. And it's true. So these characters all have names in their TCG cards. Joseph here is actually named a hall monitor, and I thought, okay, well, what if he was actually a headmaster for a magic that no one understood, and a hall monitor as well, since his class got canned. Second headmaster was really our academy principal, but his name was Merc. He was strict and didn't appreciate anyone's hard work, though I don't blame him. A lot of pixies here really need to get over themselves. I included a lot of humor within Dark Cheat's storyline, but I do have to point out, from this point on, the story gets dark and kind of like serious. So I just want to point that out. Because there's some humor with Dark Cheat's writing that I wanted to include a little bit. But also make him a villain, you know. But yeah. So anywho, the third and last headmaster was Maple Sugarleaf. She trained us in all sorcery, be it order, chaos, nature, or machine. She knew it all. So I think for this writing right here, I'm basically included like Dark Cheat basically throwing out like TCG terms, which I thought was I don't know, I thought it was kind of funny just to include that as a little nod to TCG. But yeah, anywho, she was a legend among the group of wizards that reside in Sacred Grove, and it made me shed a tear to see her floating as she did. Maple said, "Students, today you will be tested amongst your peers. I have high hopes for a lot of you today, especially those who don't meet our expectations." She stared at Ree because he still hasn't mastered stealth yet. He sighed and said, "Ma'am, I'm honestly trying my best. Do you know how hard it is to go ghost in this getup?" That's a nod to Danny Phantom if anyone's ever seen that show, but I thought that was like clever writing. He chuckled to himself, and Maple noticed and asked, "Care to go first, Baron?" He gasped and said, "Me? Oh, you haven't the slightest notion of how long I've been waiting to hear that." She smiled and asked, "Very well, do you need anything before we begin?" He thought and said, "Just make sure everyone here stands back." She looked worried, but nodded, then said, "Students, stand your guard." He motioned Ree to get into position, and he noticed out of the corner of his eye, Nervy was watching him from the stairway. She really had a crush on him if she borrowed to come out of the forge, but he continued his focus and pulled out his tablet. Merc and Joseph saw what he had pulled out and tried to stop what he was doing, but Maple shook her head and said, "I've seen the research and work he's been doing. Let him show us what he's cooked up." They sighed and nodded. He continued to start speaking spell. "Ignis Sacred Obliviate!" The spell worked, and then suddenly, Ree caught on fire. So, okay, this is where it gets a little dark. This is where it gets dark. Just FYI, in case you were like, "Whoa, what's going on?" Everyone around him was in shock and tried to put out the fire around him. Oh, yeah. I'm trying to read this in like third person almost. Even Nervy chipped in. He stood there frozen, knowing full well what he had done. His theories he had been studying for weeks finally paid off. Merc grabbed him and yelled, "What is the meaning of this, Baron? You don't just light pixies on fire." He smiled and said, "Well, I don't see the problem, Headmaster. The spell is perfect. Might need to adjust the coal counts, though. Really set Ree ablaze there. But it really was a fireworks display, if I do say so myself." So he's fully aware of what he's done, right? And he's just completely calm about it. and treating it like it's a joke. So, yeah. But it really, he was shocked and made me sit next to the guard and then said, "We will discuss further punishment after Ree has been taken to the infirmary." He was confused since he had cast his spell. He thought he passed, but no matter. He decided to browse through the deck of cards pastime. So I included like little bits of like his art. Again, he has a lot of different like TCG art, and I wanted to use all of it. So yeah, in this image, he's just looking through his deck of cards, because again, that little nod to TCG, even though it's not like this huge main feature, I wanted to include it, and I thought it would be cool to just have Baron include TCG into his life. So yeah, Maple returned from the infirmary and looked sad, so he asked her, "So tell me, what did you think of my performance? Wasn't it full fire?" "Don't tell me, actually. I bet you loved it. As a matter of fact, I bet it was the best source." She cut him off and yelled, "Rhea is gone!" He thought for a moment, said, "So you didn't like the spell? Got it. Gonna have to tinker in my room for the next eval." She looked at him in disgust. "Have you no There we go. I'm like doing proof checking on the fly. And asked, "Have you no sympathy for Rhea, your friend, your fellow student?" He smiled and said, "Rhea was a means to an end. I only made him my chum so I could further my research. Everything I did today was proof of that. So no, I feel nothing for the boy." She looked angry, but calmed down slowly, sighed, and said, "Me and the other headmasters agreed that it was best for every student if you never performed sorcery." Again, like mentioning that he's a sorcerer, sort of. But it's not like, I don't outright say he's a sorcerer. I just make it like an assumption. So, he was confused and asked, "What are you saying?" She continued, "You are hereby banished from Shrouded Glade and expelled from the academy. Pack your things and leave this place forever." He was shocked that she had said that to him, but nodded and said, "Well, all right. If you won't accept my talents, I'm sure some other genius will. Good day to you, madam." And so he left with his things and hit the road. It was a shame they didn't appreciate what he had to offer, but that's life, he supposed. His life had never been easy. As a dwarf, people often look down on you for things you can do. And when you do it, they just don't get it. He was born in Glimmerdeep, always forced to do hard work where needed, but he wanted to do more than grunt work. He wanted to prove that he was better than everyone else, because everyone back home was just like everyone else. Normal, boring, it got tiresome. So, there is no lore on where the dwarfs come from, right? In the prologue, I write that, Sacred Grove was founded by the dwarves as well. But, there's actually, in Glimmerdeep, I just want to include some lore tidbits, even though, like, we're not to that chapter yet. There's a bunch of people that live in Glimmerdeep, and Baron was actually born there in Glimmerdeep. So I would like to, assume, I didn't write it in here, but I would like to assume Baron, got out of Glimmerdeep before the hydropower dam, got built and shut off access to Glimmerdeep. But yeah, so again, there's not much lore on where Baron is from, but I did want to include the little tidbit of where he was from. And yeah, I don't know, I thought that was kind of interesting lore to add. So yeah, not knowing where to go next, he decided to try his luck in Briarwood, and made his way through the Hedge Mage. He only got so far until he was knocked out by two strong creatures. He dreamt of fire and coal. What a dream it was. Really hit the spot, and then he woke up. What a tragedy. He awoke in a cell. Figures that the sanctuary guards had put him in here for treason. He'll get out one day, but then suddenly two Chuggerwugs showed up and asked him, "Name?" He thought for a moment and had the most brilliant idea. So originally, he didn't have that full Von Darkcheat name. I just want to include that for lore purposes. His first name was Baron. That's always what it was, right? He added the Von Darkcheat part on. He didn't actually, I don't think anyone really, I didn't write it in, but no one actually knew his last name. It was just Baron. So, and then he said, "You can call me Baron Von Darkcheat." Oh my god, tiny. Fixed. Nice. He pulled out his deck of cards to show them the power he had on him. So, he, he was trying to, with this image, I was like, okay, maybe he's, trying to show off, what he can do. So I thought that was kind of funny. They looked at him confused and asked, "Okay, Baron Von Darkcheat, what brings you to Briarwood?" He said, "I'm in search of inspiration for my next creation. I thought, why not come to the most dark and despicable place I could find?" They looked to each other and nodded, then said, "Come with us." He thought to himself, that was easy, but a little too easy considering he just added on to his name, but he followed them anyway. So again, I just included there that he added on to his name, so I would love to, like, you know, include the last name, but I wouldn't even know what to call Baron's last name, so I just Baron or B for in Rhee's case. And by the way, that dark part of the story, like Baron basically setting Rhee on fire and killing him, that's like Rhee was kind of a throwaway character, but he had some purpose, you know, he was, you know, his Baron's chum, but yeah. Anywho, they brought him to a sort of throne room. It was kind of dark and filled with thorns. Then a pixie appeared on the throne. He exclaimed, "Hey, whatever I did in Shrouded Glade, it was the Hall Monster's fault. I swear on my life, madam." She chuckled and said, "Tell me why I shouldn't have you rooted where you stand, dwarf." He said, "Well, there is a number of reasons, but the main one being I need a new purpose, a muse, if you will, for whatever I create next." She seemed intrigued and said, "Do tell, or the guards here will feed you to the vine bears." He gave them the whole story about how he burned his friend alive, and he passed, then got expelled and banished for his excellent spellcasting. She smiled and said, "You've crafted your own tablet instead of a paper spell. That interests me the most, and the fact that it worked is even better. Maybe you can assist me after all." He looked at her confused and said, "I'd like to know who I'll be working with, if that's all right with you." She frowned and said, "You don't know who I am? Well, that's a shock. My name is Queen Darkthorn, sister of Queen Valerian." I nearly fell to the floor when I heard those. He nearly fell to the floor when he heard those words and asked, "Am I still in Briarwood? Afraid I can't be arrested by Sanctuary guards. I'm not so cut out for that life." She laughed and said, "My dear dwarf, you currently reside in Briarheart." So now we get to introduce. We can close that out. Now we get to introduce Darkthorn. So, yeah, kind of. There's some lore I did change here. I want to point this out before we go any further, because it is it's important. I don't know how much. I don't think there's any more lore behind. No. So I did include a bunch of lore for Darkthorn. So Darkthorn, formerly known as Princess Lavender, is Queen of Briarwood, the sister of Queen Valerian. I kept that whole point, like that stayed the same. Nothing changed there. She began ruling over Briarwood after assassination of her parents, Joffrey. Valerian's loyal and most trusted advisor blamed Lavender and the Chuggawugs, and they were exiled. She stole half the Heartseed from the royal palace, took it to Briarheart, where Lavender tore the Heartseed apart and grew a new version of the World Tree and named it Briarheart Palace. She then assumed the name of Darkthorn, Ayani's twin sister. I didn't include the twin sister part, but I did include the Ayani into storyline, obviously. Everything here basically remains the same. Except, like, the assassination of the parents, I don't really include too much. And I don't include Joffrey into the storyline at all, because I don't think is there actually a picture of him? Oh, kind of. But I don't include him in the storyline at all. I kind of keep him out of it because he's not the focus. That's a completely different storyline. And yeah, so I think there is something I do change here. In the Free Realms comic book series, explain how Darkthorn is blamed by Joffrey for poisoning her sister Queen Valerian. We learn that this is false, and at the end of the comic, it is explained how Joffrey had poisoned Queen Valerian. The comic comes out to a happy ending where Darkthorn 2 protagonists, Dane and Maya, get an antidote to Queen Valerian and save her. Darkthorn disappears seconds before Queen Valerian wakes up. Now, there is a text here. I don't know where it is. I don't even know where. It's probably like... Is it here? It says somewhere, I don't know where it says it, but basically it says Darkthorn like comes back to like Queen Valerian's side. I guess, but I don't know. I haven't read the comics yet. I know it's weird that I haven't read the comics. They're still like in their plastic wrap. I still haven't touched them. I think for the most part, like I'm basically writing my own story here, so I didn't really want to read the comics or anything. The comics are completely separate from this story, but for the most part, actually for the entire story, like Darkthorn is a villain. I just want to point that out. She is a villain, and she's kind of the whole reason this plot with Darkcheat takes place. I thought it would be cool. So it doesn't like mention like whether or not Darkcheat had help. It seems like he did everything on his own in the Series 4 like quest line. But I thought it would be cool if like Darkcheat had motive behind why he was doing all this, not just he wants to become the king of Free Realms, you know. So yeah, Darkthorn is this. She sets up this whole plot. So yeah, let's dive into it. He was in shock. It was baffling that the Chugwoods brought him all the way to the heart of Briarwood. So he asked, "Why should I trust the sister of Queen Valerian? All that pretty little princess has done for me is close off my home." She looked upon him and asked, "Just because I'm her blood doesn't mean we are the same. And where was your home?" He said, "Glimmerdeep, my lady. Your sister put a dam there and closed it off so I may never return. Not that I'd want to, but anyone I knew there wasn't able to travel to Sacred Grove." So, it's gonna be included, like, in a few chapters down, but, Queen Valerian is the one who built that hydropower dam, supposedly built the hydropower dam in Sunset Valley. Like, a lot of the Hobgoblins think that she built that dam there. And I'll dive into that when we get to that chapter, but I just wanted to point that out that yeah, the dam was built there so basically anyone in Sacred Grove was trapped and they couldn't get back. And anyone that's still down in Glimmerdeep couldn't get to Sacred Grove. So, yeah. She snickered and asked, "What if there was a way to reopen Glimmerdeep?" He gasped and exclaimed, "Preposterous! Impossible! Not even Hobgoblin dynamite could blow that dam to smithereens." She smiled and said, "Oh, there's a way, dwarf, and if you want to see those you used to know, you'll help me." He thought for a moment and realized it'd be nice to see his 13 uncles again. They've been mining for decades now. So, I would like to think there's a lot of dwarves in Glimmerdeep. I don't know. I don't think I pointed it out a lot when I wrote it, but there's probably dwarves down there. Probably. They've been mining for decades now. He asked, "What do you need from me?" She asked, "I've been doing research on the elements in our realm. Do you know the names Gleam and Gloam?" He said, "I've read of them, but there isn't much to go off of. Gleam is said to be what powers the warp zones, and as for Gloam, it seems like there's barely use for it at all." She said, "Incorrect, dwarf. You see, Gleam and Gloam are one, connected by the realm. They are like yin and yang, two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. Gleam needs Gloam to survive." He froze for a second, then asked, "There doesn't seem to be any Gloam on the warp zone, so what gives?" She said, "That's what I need your help with. A way to prove that Gloam is in fact exactly like Gleam. There is a cave to the west of Sanctuary. I have asked 3 of my henchmen to meet you there. But in that cave are 2 stones. One that represents... I guess stones is the wrong term. Artifacts. 2 artifacts. One that represents Gleam and one that represents Gloam. Your task is to find that Gloam energy and have it take the Gleam's place." He thought about this for a moment. It wasn't every day an evil queen asked you to mess with the elements of our world, so he said, "Well, why not? Those elements won't activate themselves, you know. I'll be on my way." She said, "Baron, when you return, I expect results. If you produce any, I will enact the next part of my plan." He nodded and went to Sanctuary. So yeah, basically the whole plot was like Darkthorn has this plan to almost take over, like basically take over Sacred Grove. So yeah, I thought that was a little, you know, good to include her into this plot of the story. But yeah, let's continue. And what a walk it was. He couldn't use a warp stone because Darkthorn feared he would be discovered by her sister. She had good instincts. So yeah, again, including that whole not using the warp stone thing, that's one reason Darkthorn feared he would be discovered if he used a warp stone. I just felt like the warp stones weren't really needed because of how close everything was in terms of like where I had them go. Besides, if you're on a mount, like, I mean, you go pretty fast. So anywho, he made it to the cave. She described to him and met with the henchman. Met with the henchman she mentioned. He asked, "So, are you the henchman? What are your names?" They jumped and fell to the floor. Apparently, he scared them. What a bunch of fools. The first henchman said, "Name's Bud Grimyfoot, sir." What a name, I thought to myself, but it beats Repeat Pants. Second henchman said, "Clancy Blackheart, at your service, my liege." He liked him, seemed like he was up to the task of world domination at a small scale. He said, or Darkcheat said, "Nice mustache, needs a bit of trimming, but a good time." He nodded and twirled it. What a guy. I just, my writing just became a little memeing there, but, yeah. And third and last henchman yelled, "Junkmaker Jort reporting for duty, sir!" He covered his left ear for a moment. The pipes on that Rob Goblin were insane. He asked, "Quiet down. Can't you see we're in a library?" He said, "Apologies, sir. Darkthorn said you might appreciate loyalty." He sighed and said, "My hearing over loyalty, please." So yeah, these are all the characters that I've included into the story. These are all TCG cards, by the way. I think Clancy is a hero. I'm not sure. I think Jort might be as well. It's hard. I think I included a lot of just heroes. So yeah, I figured, like, you know, because Darkcheat had 3 henchmen, I thought, okay, well, why don't I just make them new original characters? And I did. I went with, like, these two I just went with because they looked like henchmen. But for this guy right here, Clancy, he's actually going to play a pretty big part in the story, by the way. He nearly looked like Darkcheat with this little mustache. I thought that was just clever that they put that in there. I was like, it's like the art team really wanted him to be a villain, so I thought, why not include that in there? And he could have been a hooligan, but I thought it might have been fun to include this character into the story. So anywho, let's get back to it. A Wugachug, a human Rob Goblin, couldn't have picked a better team of henchmen for me. Darkthorn, he said, "Gentlemen, these are drastic times. Lady Darkthorn demands of me that I reverse engineer the elements. For now, I ask that you scout the perimeter and make sure no one disturbs my work." They all nodded and went outside the cave to scout the area. He began to take a look around the cave and noticed all the books, lots of research on the elements as Darkthorn had mentioned, and then he saw them, the 2 artifacts, one of Gleam and one of Gloam. They floated but seemed inactive, no energy coming off of either of them, like they were switched off, so he decided to begin his research. So around this point, this is the point where Talia enters the story. But I'll read a little bit of, like, what happens before that point. So, reading over the ancient text written by those who have experienced the power of the elements, it is said that Gleam and Gloam have always been in a constant power shift, but Gleam always took over. Gloam never once got the chance to prove to the realm what it could do. He took a look at the Gloam artifact and said, "My friend, I know how you feel, but worry not. I will make sure you get the chance to show the realm what you're capable of." So basically, he read in the text, because, like, over the years since the Unbinding, people, like, wrote down, like, you know, anything they could learn about the elements, and Gleam always took over. Then, you know, Gloam never got a chance. So, yeah. And he says, he spent days researching these elements, even elements that might connect to it. There's no instance in which Gloam overpowered Gleam, no event that showed Gloam held true power. He even ran tests on the artifacts, but still they were in constant flux, always swapping power back and forth, never deciding on who would get to wield it. He also tried creating tablets, not like the one that set Rhea on fire, but ones that might give the Gloam artifact a boost. But no luck. His tablets had no effect on them. Perhaps magic wasn't the key either. He ended up taking a small break in our room, contemplating his failure as a genius. And that's... I guess, why not? Why, but when? That's when he heard small footsteps from the main room. So yeah, this is the point where Talia enters the story, and that's when they activate the artifacts. I don't point out... Well, I do point out that her name is Talia, but yeah, so I kind of just go over the story again real quick, and yeah, it's pretty clear, like, what happened. It's already been told with Talia's story, but yeah. And then, from that point, he left the cave, and then I'll continue. So he looked for his henchmen and called out for them. Bud, Clancy, Jort, report to me at once. They appeared out of the forest, saw his glowing eyes. His glowing, like, purple eyes. And Clancy said, I like the new look, boss. Really matches your suit. They nodded in agreement. He chuckled and asked, Thank you, Clancy, but flattery will get you nowhere in this realm. I'm ready to return to Briarheart, but before we do, anything to report from your scouting? Clancy snickered and said, There's an academy down the forest below. Looks like Sanctuary's getting nervous, sir. He thought for a moment, realized this might be the perfect opportunity to give his gloam abilities a trial run. Then he said, Henchmen, head back to Briarheart. I will return once I am finished here. They all left, but he pulled Clancy aside and said, Good work today. I'll have Darkthorn promote you at once. Clancy nodded and returned to Briarheart. He went down to this academy Clancy had mentioned and encountered an old wizard. He said, My name is Azure, teacher of this school and protector of its students. State your name and business. His eyes glowed purple and said, My name is Baron Von Darkcheat. My business. Well, old man, if you must know, I grow tired of places like these, and people like you, and I intend to be rid of them both. So he's obviously pissed about, like, Shrouded Glade and being expelled from there, and he saw another academy and thought, well, no, that's no good. So he summoned dark purple fire from his hands, looked directly at him. He then used his staff to conjure a spell to use against me. So there is actually another piece of art for Azure, and it's him using this, like, his staff, and it's pretty... kind of hard to tell if it's the same thing, but it looks the same in the art. And yeah, he tries to conjure a spell, and then Darkcheat takes notice of the staff and sets it ablaze before he can do any damage to him. It burnt his hand as well. He said, Please, whatever you do, don't hurt the students. He smiled and said, Old man, I'm going to do more than hurt them. They won't feel a thing after I've burned this place to the ground, believe me. And neither will you. His eyes glowed that dark purple, and he burned him to ashes. Then he set the whole building ablaze in dark purple flame. He laughed and admired his work, then said to the gloam, My friend, if only Mabel Sugarleaf could see our work now. She'd be so jealous. So yeah, so that whole point in Talia's story where, like, the academy was, like, you know, nothing, and everyone was, like, gone, and Kuro was the only one left. So that was Darkcheat's doing. You probably could have, like, inferred that from, like, how I wrote it. But yeah, in case you didn't know, Darkcheat was the one that burnt the place down. And, you know, set the academy ablaze and killed everyone inside. So yeah, the story gets dark. It definitely gets dark. And serious. But yeah, so anywho, he made his way back to Briarheart to report to Queen Darkthorn. His success in that cave was something else, and this was only the beginning of what was to come. For this gloam still needed time to shine. He made it back to Darkthorn Palace, a name that he gave to the place, seeing as Darkthorn didn't give it one. Yeah, there was no name for the palace. I mean, I think it's literally just called a palace. I mean, she named it Briarheart Palace, but he named it Darkthorn Palace. He thought, oh, she didn't have a name for it, because he didn't know, obviously. But yeah, anywho, he approached the queen and said, I've done it. He looked at her with his dark purple eyes as she smiled. He said, The gloam resides within me, but I need another way of expanding its power. She thought for a moment and said, If the gloam still hasn't reached its full potential, you'll need to go to a site where it can familiarize itself with more power. Make the journey to Blackspore Swamp. There you will find an ancient precursor site where ropestone relics are scattered across the island. He nodded and started heading out. But before he did, he said, That Clancy Blackheart, make sure he has a place by my side for our next big mission. She nodded and said, he's a good henchman, isn't he? I saw that dark fire in his eyes from the start. He shook his head and said, he's more than Bud and Jort. He definitely has yet to show what he's truly capable of. She nodded and sent him on his way. So, him going to Black Spore, this like ancient site, it's actually where that dwarf in the prologue built the Gleamstone. So he's going to that same site almost, except it's a lot different. Like the site originally in the prologue was just like nothing. It was like a graveyard almost. And now it's kind of different. So yeah. So he arrives in Black Spore alone this time due to the severity of his task, whatever Darkthrone wants him to do, hopefully as the answers he's looking for. While walking on the stone trail, he heard someone say, "Care to have your fortune read?" He turned and saw a woman next to a wagon built into a mobile home of sorts. He said, "Sorry, I don't believe in false prophecies. Good day to you." She waved him over and said, "Surely someone of your stature would love to know what's in store for his future." He thought for a moment and asked, "I don't believe I caught your name, miss," she said. "You can call me Madame Zelda." So Madame Zelda, again, playing a part in the story. This is like her second role in the story, which I thought was really, really neat. So yeah, she encounters. Oh crap! I forgot to include that. But yeah, she encounters Darkchi, and I thought that was really neat. That she was there when he was making his way to Black Spore. So yeah, I wanted to include that into the story, that she still serves this purpose of she's a part of the story heavily. And then she says, "A pleasure to..." Oh, that's why I didn't include... I'm dumb. Okay. There we go. Okay. "A pleasure to meet you, sir." He adjusted his top hat and said, "The name's Baron, but the answer's still no. If the future's already written, I'd like to keep it a surprise." She kept insisting and said, "But if you sit down, we can do tarot." He cut her off, his eye turned into that dark purple again, and he yelled, "I do not have time for your games, madam. I will burn your home to the ground if you continue to be a bother. Do I make myself clear?" She looked scared and frozen, but she managed to get out a word or two, saying, "Yes, I understand." Calmed down, still with dark purple in his eyes, saying, "Good, now if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." So he gets pretty violent real quick. He's to the punch. Like he's very he's gotta go, you know? But yeah. So he left to go find the precursor site, knowing full well this mattered more than silly little card games. He found the site. It looked like the warp zones he had seen all over Sacred Grove. Though there were a few of those warp zones, he imagined this might have been a graveyard or a birthplace for them. So yeah, there is a place. This is an actual place in Black Spore, and I've seen it in game, and I was like, okay, this looks neat. And I thought, okay, what's with all these like warpstone looking objects? And I thought maybe this could be where the Unbinding took place, or where the Gleamstone was made. Not where the Unbinding took place, but like where the Gleamstone was made. I thought it was a neat little site that like could have made sense in the story aspect. So yeah, I include this place in the story, and that's where he started building what he was making. So he started breaking apart pieces of the relics with tools that were lying about, and began building something perfect for the Gloam to reside within. It took several hours to do what needed to be done. He forged an item much like Nervy would in Shredderglade, and it had beauty to it. Each of the sides of what he had created were colored, an unfortunate accident while tearing apart the gleam inside the relics, but they were similar to that of card spheres in the silly game he played. So again, nods to TCG, Chaos Order Machine Nature. And in the center of it, a dark-shaped cylinder that would harness the power of the Gloam. He put out his hands and his eyes started to glow in front of the object. He began transferring the Gloam power into it, and sure enough, the object radiated with Gloam energy. No Gloam power resided within him, and all of it had gone into the object. He picked it back up and could feel what it felt. True power, but it felt weaker than when it was a part of him. It needed more time to be ready for the next big test of its potential. He looked at it and thinking it needed more than purpose and power. It needed a name to describe what it was for the realm. He said its name aloud for everyone in the grove to hear. I shall give you the name Gloamstone. May you spread across Sacred Grove like a plague. So he placed it around him like a necklace and started to make his way to Briarheart. So yeah, I guess we can bring up the Gloamstone now since it's very vital to the story. So the Gloamstone is a weapon Barian von Darkcheek created. It is presumed to be ancient and capable of bringing about darkness to Sacred Grove if in the wrong hands. During the questline, the player must foil Baron's plans by defeating his goons. Later, Baron himself, by the end of the questline, the Gloamstone can be obtained by the player as a hoverboard. So, I didn't know about this hoverboard, funny enough. I probably didn't even finish the Realm Keeper's questline in the OG game. I'm thinking that I never did. And I'm hopefully going to when FRS launches, but we'll see. But yeah, so there's not much lore behind the Gloamstone, just that's a weapon Baron von Darkcheek created, so I figured, why not have him create it? And yeah, so all these parts of the Gloamstone are very important. And I'll go into it in this chapter on why they're all important. So yeah, let's keep going. Before he did, he headed out on the stone path, and Madame Zelda caught him off guard and said, "That queen of yours is not all she seems. I'd be cautious if I were you, Baron." He scoffed and said, "What would you know about Lady Darkthorn? You know absolutely nothing." She chuckled and asked, "You mean Princess Lavender? Trust me, I know more than you could ever hope to. Why don't you ask her if you're so sure?" He looked at her confused and said, "Maybe I will, but not because you told me to, because I chose for myself." She smiled and said, "You do that, Baron." She looked at the Gloamstone he had crafted and asked, "What is that around your neck?" He said, "I can't give you the details, madam, but I can assure you this will change the world for the better." She raised her eyebrows at him and said, "I hope so. It'd be nice if Blackspur got a little brighter. I love living here, but because I can connect with spirits. But if it could be sunny for just a day, I'd take it." He laughed and said, "Oh, that's rich. Are you being serious? If our realm was filled with nothing but light, Sacred Grove might cease to exist. You can't have light without darkness." She nodded and said, "Sometimes darkness can be a bad thing." He scoffed and said, "I have yet to see proof of that, but no matter, I need to head back." He waved her off, even though she seemed concerned for his well-being. He was confident in his work and what would come next. So, there might be some truth to what he's saying. I think, because, Black Spore and Briarwood are, like, the only two places where, like, there's not really a whole ton of light. It's literally just always nighttime or it's covered in darkness. And I think Briarwood is probably, like, covered in that gloam stuff. So, like, there really is no definitive answer. Like, if the world was covered in light, would it be, would it cease to exist? Or if the world was covered in darkness, aka gloam, would it cease to exist? There's no, like, way of knowing that. So, anywho, let's continue. Finally, he returned to Briarheart. Clancy greeted him and said, "Lady Thorn is expecting you, and she's making me some new gear to wear instead of this green hoodie." He nodded and said, "Good, that green hoodie looked atrocious. You need something with a little more flair to your wardrobe." He chuckled and asked, "So did that come from your journey?" He said, "Yes, this little object is the answer to our problems. Hopefully it will satisfy Darkthorn." They approached the Dark Throne, and she asked, "What have you been working on in Black Spore?" He said, "So, is Darkthorn your real name, or is it Princess Lavender? Ran into some fortune teller that knows more than you're letting on. Spill the beans, or this deal is off." She sighed and said, "That's a name I shed when I found out Valerian became queen, and I became forgotten about. No one noticed me or appreciated what I had done, so I came here to discover myself. Years later, here I am, Queen of Briarheart. So I may have left one part of my pointless life out, but it doesn't matter anymore." So I did include, like I said, I didn't include the whole assassination of the parents or Joffrey or anything like that. I basically included, so like when Ayani obviously died, I would like to think she died of natural causes in my story. Obviously someone had to be queen, and that was Valerian, and basically Lavender became forgotten about. And then she, obviously she took the seed, went to Briarheart, and started her own thing. So I think that's kind of like how I would like the story to go. I think it makes a lot more sense. I could have included Joffrey into the lore, but I didn't know how to fit that all in. So, yeah, let's continue. He nodded and said, all right then, I trust you. He showed her the Gloamstone's radiating aura, then said, this is the Gloamstone, an object that will enhance the Gloam power tenfold. Unfortunately, transferring the power from me to the object has it in a weakened state. But no matter, if we give it time, it will evolve into something magnificent. She nodded and asked, how long will it need? I have some ideas for what we can do with that power. He sighed and said, only time will tell, but based on what I felt, a few years maybe? She was frustrated and asked, we need to hide this power from outsiders. Do you know where we can hide it? He looked at her and asked, why not just hide it here? She looked at the Chugwun and asked, the gods here are loyal to me, but if they take one look at that, they'd use it for whatever Chugwugs use power for. So, do you have a place in mind where no one would look? He said, yes, I do. In fact, Snow Hill Peak is where the Gloamstone can evolve. The Yeti's there only taking hot springs, so placing it atop the highest peak will keep it from those who wish to use it for anything else. She frowned and said, I hope you're right. If that object goes missing, it's your job to find it. He nodded and made his way to Snow Hill Peak with Clancy. He had him do the legwork to get to the top. He knew he couldn't make it up there with his dwarf legs. A little bit of humor there. He climbed back down and said, Gloamstone secure, boss. He smiled and said, excellent. We'll be back in a few years to check on it, but in the meantime, we'll stay in Darkthorn's Keep. Plot away at what we can do with that power. So yeah, this is basically how Talia finds that object, the Gloamstone, is, you know, Baron built it, but she doesn't know that, so she actually sensed the object because she still has a connection to the elements, like Gleam and Gloam. And yeah, that's how she ended up finding it at the top of Snow Hill Peak, because Shrouded Glade and Snow Hill, they're pretty close to one another. So, yeah. And so they did. They schemed and plotted away in that keep for a few years, played some cards to keep their strategy game up, again, including TCG into the story. And he and Clancy became good chums. Unlike Ree, he was smart and noble. Darkthorn stopped by her study, and he was doing some light reading. She asked, do you think it's time? He looked at the date and said, I think we've given the Gloamstone enough time to evolve. I'll bring Clancy to Snow Hill Peak so we can grab it. She nodded, and we headed for they headed for the mountains. Clancy climbed to the peak and where they had set the Gloamstone. He came down with nothing, and he asked, wait, where is it? Sad said, it's gone. Someone must have gotten smart and grabbed it. He was shocked and said, it can't be gone. There must be some explanation. He stopped and saw something glowing with a dark aura on the ground. It was the cylinder he had put into the center of the Gloamstone. It was filled with a lot of power. He could feel it. He said, someone took apart the object, but left the most important piece behind. We've got work to do. Follow me to Sanctuary. In his adventure, he completely forgot about that pixie girl, Talia. She was still locked in the cave. So they went back to the cave where it all started. And when he opened the door, she was gone. He looked around and saw a stack of books stacked to a hole in the roof. He asked, God took it apart. Had to be. What person has a connection like that, like mine, to the elements? Clancy shrugged and asked, what do we do now? He thought for a moment and said, we can still do what we plan to do, just in this small scale. We'll report back to Darkthorn and give her the news. He nodded, and so they started to make their way back to Briarheart. They told her what happened, and she exclaimed, did you forget to mention a pixie girl trapped in a cave? That would have been nice to know, Dark Sheet. He cleared his throat and said, yes, I did forget to mention the troublesome brat, but it doesn't matter. Her connection to Gleam is only a small amount compared to what I have right here. He referred to the cylinder and continued, whatever she's done with the shards, we'll find them in time. She was still furious and asked, does her connection have anything to do with finding the stone? And then that's where I include that part where, like, her connection to Gleam is the reason she found it. He froze for a second and said, I'll be honest, I didn't think of that, and it makes so much sense now. But my lady, we can still do something here, at least in small scale. The shards only amplify the Gloam power. She sighed and asked, if we were to use any of this Gloam power we have, what would you suggest? Any place in mind you'd want to test it in? He had an idea and said, my old academy might do the trick. Let's use it in Shrouded Glade. She nodded and said, I'll send Briarwood's forces to Shroudglade soon then, and hopefully whatever Glum power comes from that cylinder will be more than enough to take control. But then before they began more planning, Buttondor bolted through the keep doors and exclaimed, "Boss, you gotta see this," he said. "Can't it wait, you idiots? We're in the middle of planning an invasion here." They shook their heads and handed him 8 cards from the game he plays. From the game played. He took a look and smiled, and then said, well, look at what we have here, gentlemen. Fine work today. So, I'm going to include why these cards are included here. I just want to point that out. But Talia did make these cards to kind of use it as bait to get Baron. So those are there for that reason. But the other 4, it's included in the next chapter. So anywho, let's get back to it. He said, I believe these are the culprits of the missing shards to the cylinder, and Talia must be with them. She laughed and said, good work. We'll begin with our small-scale invasion first, then go after the shards next. Soon Sacred Grove will be ours. And thus their plans were set in motion. They gathered everything they needed and made their way to Shrouded Glade. With Glum power back in his hands, nothing would be able to stop them. So yeah, this next part, I'm going to go into it deep, but let's just jump into Chapter 11, Glum Invasion.